All right, welcome everyone to the Board of Selectmen's hopefully final workshop on Chapter 38. We're going to pick up where we left off at the last meeting, and that is in the agenda. I'm going to call this to order. I'm just going to check to make sure. Yeah, we've got a quorum, so we're good with that. And Joe briefed me on a slight adjustment to the agenda. So after we go through the land use table, there are some recommendations from the code enforcement officer. Unfortunately, Bailey couldn't join us tonight. She had a conflict. So we've got Wes Dugan from the planning board, and thank you very much, Wes, for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Yes,
we
no
really
problem.
appreciate. Thank you. So that will be the only adjustment to the agenda. Don't see Steve Philbrick yet, so I'm just going to, as we move through here, I just want to make sure he is going to be joining us. We do, I reached out to some of the folks who had, been participating in our meetings, and there were a couple of conflicts tonight. We've got the Bob Marley event going on at the Lakeside Theater, and there was, I think there's a Masons meeting tonight. There's a couple of other meetings. So, we do our best, or we try our best to schedule thoughtfully, but we've got running out of time here with Chapter 38. And there is Mr. Philbrick.
Hi, sorry I'm a few minutes late.
That's okay. So Steve, there's just one slight adjustment to the agenda, and that is after we are through discussing the land use table, there are recommendations Joe would like to bring forth from the code enforcement officer. Bailey could not join us tonight, so we have Wes Dugan from the planning board who's with us. All right, moving forward. So if everyone is on page 3825, we left off at daycare center home, and we are we're beginning, with daycare home. This is a new addition to the land use table because it's in green. And it looks like, and all new uses, of course, as well. So there's daycare home is not allowed in resource protection and seems to require planning board approval for every other location except industrial, where it is not allowed as well. The number 4 notation is home occupations shall comply with the standards contained in section 38.912, which is on page 3887. So if you're able to look at your definition of daycare home, let's see, it is a home or other suitable structure which meets the state licensing requirements for day-to-day homes, which cares for 3 to 12 children. A daycare home may be considered a home occupation if it meets all standards applicable to home occupations. So any thoughts from the board on this one? I think a general concern that was raised the last time was the fact that we need daycare providers in the area, and if they meet state licensing and have a few children, we certainly don't want to bring a barrier to services. So is everyone okay with the planning board approval as opposed to code enforcement officer approval, or something just a little more direct that doesn't require, a planning board meeting? Wes, do you recall what you guys discussed with this regarding the planning board and why you wanted, why you felt planning board approval was necessary?
Well, basically, because it's like a business. You're going to be putting a business in a residential zone. So the board, we just wanted to be able to review it basically before any conditional use permits were given out to anybody. That was basically it.
Okay, thank you, Wes.
Yep.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Steve.
I think it's appropriate to be in a planning board environment with a conditional use because we have to be concerned about life safety issues. No, children are not, Wes is correct, it's a business, but we're dealing with children that could escape the fenced in areas, you know, there's a myriad of things that could occur. So I think this is where it needs to be. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Any other comments? Ethna, looks like you're trying to unmute, or maybe not. Okay.
Hold on, I am.
Okay.
Sorry. I just want to be clear. Planning board approval and CUP are two different things, correct? They're different processes. Planning board approval, which is what you currently have this under, is different than conditional use permit.
Well,
Yes.
what are you
Go ahead,
talking
Wes, go
about?
ahead.
Yes, yes, it is because we've got conditional use that is that is, you know, clearly identified specifically within the, you know, within the land use table.
And with conditions, that's the difference between planning board and conditional use, isn't it? The conditional use permit requires that you meet a set standard of conditions in order to get the use permit. So what was the reasoning behind not making them go for a conditional use permit like almost every other business has to, versus going for the planning board?
Well,
Probably
you would
because they
get
already have to get state licensed. Sorry, go ahead, Wes.
You would
Okay.
get a conditional use permit after you went and saw the planning board. Like we would give you one if everything panned out. And that would be your conditional use permit at that point.
So then what's the difference between PB and CUP or CU on this table? If you're telling me you're handing out the same permit, what's the difference?
I think because it's got to come in front of the planning board. Before
Right.
Bailey can't just give the, you know, our code enforcement officer just can't give the permit for it. It would have to come in front of us and we could check the property, make sure, you know what I mean?
Right, so that's planning board approval for a permit. Conditional use permits are different, in my understanding of the process. I'm just trying to make it clear why some say PB and some say CU when they are two totally different permitting processes. Yes, they both go in front of the planning board, but they're different permits, correct?
Ethna's right. So Wes, what Bailey had explained to us the last time or at our last meeting was that there was on one of the use tables, it had indicated that it was conditional, you know, it had been planning board and it was changed to conditional use or vice versa. And what Bailey explained to us was that the conditional use is more restrictive. There's more criteria involved. It's a little more, whereas planning board, you guys can review and issue approval at your meeting is what I understood that Bailey was saying. And the conditional use was an extra step, which is why it's differentiated in this land use table. Did I interpret Bailey right?
I think when it comes basically to businesses, all permits that the planning board issues are conditional use. When it comes to businesses.
Okay, I see Chris Farmer has his hand up. So thank you, Wes. Chris, go ahead.
Sorry, I can just chime in for a couple minutes tonight, but conditional use traditionally, I'm not sure if we've got it dialed in as well as we should, because conditional use is primarily designed that if zoning doesn't have a standard set of uses and you want to be able to do something that isn't conforming to the zoning as it sits, you have to apply for a conditional use in those pieces. Now, some towns have gone overboard and make everything you do a conditional use so they can have complete control of that part. But there's a balance that needs to be struck with that in order to do that. And traditionally, but a conditional use was designed as a way to allow a use that normally wasn't approved in the zone to be approved, but with additional restrictions. But as I said, some municipalities have now said, okay, you change something from one use to the other, even though they're both acceptable uses in the zone, you have to get a conditional use. And that's kind of where we are at now. So it's additional work that's created because of that. Now, planning boards are allowed to put any restrictions that they want on as long as it relates to the project and how it might vary from the standard uses that exist. So I think it's important that we use the planning tools as they're designed, and we don't put additional burdensome on staff on those type of things. If we can determine as we're going through, if we're really doing a thorough use of Chapter 38, we should determine what uses are appropriate in what zones. And if they are outside of those uses, but are possibly permitted, then they can be set with the conditional use. And that's where that plan, that table should work within that confines of that. Hope that clears a couple things up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. So is the board all set with the planning board approval for daycare home, or are there still more questions?
I have one more question.
Steve.
Maybe Chris can chime in on this too after I'm done trying to formulate my questions so that it's understandable. Can a code enforcement officer issue a conditional use permit? Number one. So if the answer is no, which I think it is, then it's planning board approval, period. Correct? I see Wes shaking his head. Yes.
Pretty sure you're right on that, Steve.
All right. That being the case, then I think a definition of conditional use permit is an order that's a little bit lengthier than what we currently have, much along the lines of what Mr. Farmer just presented, because conditional use means there are conditions associated with the permit, be it parking, be it whatever it is. So it's all planning board. And then from that point forward, a conditional use permit or just a permit will be issued, but it's planning board, period. That makes sense? I guess not.
Yes,
Nope.
makes sense to me.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I agree.
Okay. All right. Yes, Mark.
Is there a difference between daycare and a nursery school?
I was thinking that when we discussed this, Mark, maybe we made an assumption, but a nursery school we would have put under a daycare center. So the daycare at home would be, just just your mother watching a few kids, and then anything up and above and beyond that, we wanted to put it as a daycare center, which I would assume would be your nursery schools.
Yeah, I'm just going by memory, but I think the two definitions, the break off is the number of children that are there between a daycare center and a daycare home. And
it is per state law.
I think it's 12.
Actually,
Under
13
12
or
and under
more.
is a daycare home, and 13 and more is a daycare center.
Yeah.
Madam Chair?
And yes.
Having a minor affiliation with Little Mountain School, which is, from a state standpoint, is a nursery school, much like Mark used as a moniker for that. There's a criterion that they have to follow with the state, and there's a learning aspect to it where the daycare centers are a watchful eye over the children during the course of the day without a curriculum associated with it. I think that's the distinction between the two.
But it's not dealt with in our, there's no distinction in our ordinance or definitions.
There's no definition for nursery school in our ordinance. And I mean, we can always check state statute to see if there are other, you know, other names that, you know, they incorporate, because both daycare home and daycare center require state licensing standards.
I had a
Chris,
second.
Yes, go ahead, Mark.
Does everything that go in front of the planning board require a public hearing?
Anything
know.
commercial.
I mean, anything.
Not
Anything in this
everything.
chart that says planning board approval or conditional use, does that trigger a public hearing?
I don't think most of the stuff in this chart would require a public hearing. Some of the stuff, like a 2-family dwelling, would not. But most of it, yes, it would require a public hearing.
Is that clearly
All right.
defined somewhere? Because it doesn't seem to be.
Well, it's basically, we only have to do public hearings on commercial stuff.
On
Unless-
conditional use permits,
Yes.
on conditional use permits. There's a difference.
Chris, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, Ethna's right. Every conditional use permit requires a public hearing because it's an additional restriction outside of traditional zoning. This goes back
Right.
to what we've got to figure out and get dialed in on some of this stuff, because that's where the challenges are. Because if it's going to be a conditional use, technically it's something that's outside what the traditional zoning is agreed to.
Yeah.
And if we're going to get into definitions, I highly recommend that we focus on using reference to state statutes where those are defined, because those change and evolve over time. And it's not an easy process for us to get ordinances amended. So the more we can do with using the state definitions for items will save us from getting into challenges.
That's a good point, Chris, and we can always add as amended. You know, when that, you know, if we provide a definition for people to look at and the state statute and indicate as amended, then it won't require it won't require a town vote for the change. I mean, it's nice to have the definitions here just to thumb through without, you know, hopping on the main.gov website, but all right. So at this point, daycare home requires planning board approval. There is no conditional use permit. There's no hearing. They are reviewing the application and saying yes or no. Is everyone okay with that? Chris, did you have a follow-up question? You have your hand up. All right.
Sorry, I didn't take it down. I'll do it
okay.
right now.
All right, so seeing no objection, we'll move on to essential services. A couple of slight changes. We've got conditional use that was previously required for resource and shoreland, which now requires planning board approval. The rest can the code enforcement officer can issue building permits. So this is for essential services. Yes, Mark.
As I brought up when we were on page 3928, they struck the word utilities, and I recommended that the town should leave that in And I also question why the buildings which are necessary for furnishing that service was deleted as well. And so I think I didn't hear any compelling reason for this change. And Bailey just said she thought it was in the chapter 1000 that dealt with shoreland zone. But I think we're better off just to leave that utilities or essential services and not change the definition. I'm not questioning the categories of use, but I just think the title and the definition need to be consistent.
Yeah, I had some notes on that from our last meeting, and I did ask Joe, because I knew Bailey wasn't going to be able to be here tonight, and that seemed to be a concern of the selectmen, that with that change, not allowing supported or buildings that supported that essential services to be a part of that. So, and the other thing noted, and you're right, I mean, Bailey did mention that it came from chapter 1000, but that solely deals with shoreland zone, and essential services are not going to, they'll probably rarely be affiliated with shoreland zone. So I'm not sure why we would change it anyway. And I mean, what the purpose was for deleting, for deleting the definition of utilities. And then merging, a portion of it with essential services, but the service drops and similar accessories and buildings which are necessary for the furnishing of such services are not included. So yes, Steve.
No, Ethna had her hand up first.
I'm sorry, Ethna.
It's okay. Thank you, Steve. And so just really quick, and I'm so sorry if it's in here somewhere else, but I didn't see where we pick up utilities anywhere else in the table. So are we redefining utilities as an essential service and just wiping out the word utilities? Because utilities still has potential to be a use and should be addressed in the table.
Yeah, utilities, according to the glossary, the revised chapter 38, utilities is struck, and utilities or essential services, that paragraph is struck. It's all red. And they have merged some of that in with essential services. Steve, did you have a companion question to Ethna's?
I agree with Ethna's point of view, and to some degree, I do believe we need essential services defined in the glossary as its own entity. What is an essential service? And secondly, across the board, in my opinion, it's planning board. I believe it requires public input, a public acknowledgement, not somebody just coming in, applying for a permit, and the next thing you know, there's something going up where everybody's up in arms with, and it should not just, and I think the shoreland zoning we're missing, if you think back to when we designed the Aquasic water district, the Aquasic Standard Water District, that's in the shoreland zone, the wells. So we will be faced at some points, possibly in the future, with a shoreland impact. So they can't be dismissed, or we need to be careful with this. So in my opinion, right across the board, where it says planning board, and then CEO, it should be planning board all the way across. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd really want Bailey's comment on that. So getting back to Ethna's concern it sounds like Ethna feels, and Steve, I do as well, that utilities definition needs to remain and not be struck. And correct me if I'm not interpreting, your comments correctly. And that the essential services, delete what was merged from utilities and maybe have a better definition from what, Steve is saying, Ethna as well, regarding what qualifies as essential services, a little more descriptive. Is that correct? Ethna?
So just, it is, it does. It comes around to, my concern was if they dropped the word utility, was that because they were calling it an essential service? Is utilities now an essential service? If so, it should be included in the definition of essential service. If utilities is not an essential service, then there needs to be a definition for it, one. And two, it needs to be in this use table, because utilities can be put up in the region. So we need to make sure we've covered where we want them.
So you're suggesting that the red line through utilities on be remain there? Utilities
I'm suggesting that whatever the intent was behind that, is it utilities or are we now saying that utility is an essential service? It just needs to be cleared up, because if it's not an essential service and won't be defined under the essential service, then it needs to be its own piece in this table, in the use table. It needs to have its own definition so that we make sure it's covered. Otherwise, somebody could come and attempt to put in utilities and we've got nothing saying where it can and can't go, unless the intent is to make it an essential service. If the utilities is in fact intended to be determined to be an essential service, then it needs to be defined as such, and then you can strike the word utilities. But if that is not the intent, then that word needs to stay there.
I believe the intent is to incorporate utilities into essential service. I do agree, we do need a definition on it, but that is the intent.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so there haven't been any problems with this definition as it was, so I don't see any point in changing it. Because you need to cover utilities or essential services, and it seems to have done a good job.
And this one
Are you
includes the
kidding?
buildings and the current or the struck definition of utilities or essential services includes the necessary accessories and buildings which are necessary for the furnishing of such services. Mark, you have your hand up?
Yes, and as I'll go back to the example that I used at the last meeting, the sewer treatment pump system, when that pump station 4 was on a piece of land that I had that, made arrangements for the town to locate their pump station on. I just can't picture having a pump station that didn't have housing over it to protect the controls and the electronics and all of that, and why you wouldn't just deal with that in one process rather than breaking the building out from the rest of it. It just seems like you're making things way more complicated and costly even for the town themselves to provide these services. So I don't see why you wouldn't allow for the buildings that are required to put these utilities and essential services, and it doesn't make sense to me to remove that.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Chris, you've got your hand up. Ethan, you're next. Chris, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry, I was driving. I had to stop. So I guess maybe nobody's calling the elephant in the room, but isn't the whole reason that probably some of this is getting monkeyed around is based on the fact that some people were concerned a utility project probably should have had a public hearing versus not having it. And that's why we're really looking at this, which, I mean, that's a lot of times how zoning changes come about, is because of people looking at things and thinking things should have been a different way there. I mean, I'm not getting into the issue of it, but I think that's where this is kind of coming. That's why probably any of this was looked at for revision. And so I think there has been a problem with it in some people's eyes, obviously enough to go file an ADB action. So I think this needs some serious revision and look at in order to make sure we handle the concerns of the past as we go forward. And however that is, clear definitions save problems. Would have saved us a problem with before with light industrial versus heavy industrial if it was clear. Wouldn't have had to go to the Maine Supreme Court. So I think it's important we get this right and figure it out and move on so that, you know, things work. I'm not saying any actions before were right or not right, but I think that's why this whole paragraph's being monkeyed with, and maybe I'm just being Captain Obvious here, but I think we should just call it what it is and figure this out. And again, another reason that I'm going to plead to the board that we really think about waiting on this chapter 38, because this needs a lot of noodling. And when I say noodling, I mean lawyering and research and looking at other ordinances and getting that set. I think this is going to be a bone of contention if this just went to public hearing, regardless of what we come up with in the short interim. So I've got to run to a Masonic meeting that was previously scheduled a couple months in advance of this, so I apologize, but I appreciate, as always, the opportunity to provide my 2 cents in, because I don't always get to do that at home.
All right, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Ethan next, and then Steve, then Wes. Go ahead, Ethan.
Well, I was going to let you respond to Mr. Farmer now, because a lot of information has just been put across the meeting since what I was going to say in response to Mark's comment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Chris has let us know he strongly feels that, you know, this chapter 38 should wait another year. And what we owe it to the process is going through and digesting everything in chapter 38 so that we recognize the challenges. We just can't stop the process. I mean, we can discuss this have it on the agenda at our next board meeting, but and this has been a huge undertaking, and the board has put a lot of time into it, but these chapter 38 revisions deserved our time, deserved public information and public comment, as though we, were, with the intent of providing it, for public vote this June. As we get closer to that, we can discuss this further, but we owe it. We're in a workshop now, and we're going to continue to discuss the land use table. So that's where the board is at in this process. Ethan, if you don't have any further comments, I'm going to go to Steve and then Wes.
Yeah, go ahead to Steve.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, based upon what Chris just said and what we've been discussing, and you just mentioned that we're going over the land use table, you'll see it says CEO from Woodland all the way to the right, including the Route 17 overlay. I can't stress highly enough that this should all be planning board, every single category. Everything that has to do with essential services in the current definition requires, in my opinion, public input. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep, thank you. Wes, go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry for the wait.
So Chris was right on why we actually were reviewing essential services. It was because of a utility project that got approved. We as a planning board thought that we should have reviewed that and voted on that and had a town meeting on that. That being said, I agree with Steve, and this is what I wanted from the start. I wanted planning board to have authority over all essential services in the town of Rangeley, so we could review everything that goes on. I got voted down, obviously, and we got what we got, but that's what I originally wanted.
Mhm.
That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, thank you, Wes. Again, we need Bailey's comment on this. And so Ethna or Shelley, I'll get you in a second, Val. Ethna or Shelley, any thoughts on Steve's recommendation that everything in essential services that currently says CEO read planning board?
Like I said, I agree with you. I think we need to check with Bailey on it because it looks like it has been in the past, the CEO who has been doing it. And I think there's reasons for that we may not be actually seeing. And I know that I have confidence in our code enforcement officer. If something did happen where they felt that it should be a move to a different category where the planning board should review it, I think that would be in that discretion at that line. But I would like to hear what Bailey has to say about those. And unless Wes has any idea of something that has come up where that got missed or to that effect.
Okay. Ethna, do you have a different opinion? Val, I'll get you in just a sec.
So I'm gonna make an assumption. Probably shouldn't do it, but I'm gonna. Permitting for essential services is the only permitting process, not an assumption. I guess I'm gonna put out there my thought process on it is there any permitting process other than the local? I mean, do they have to get permits from somewhere else in order to provide the essential service? I mean, if there's a state level permit out there that they're required to jump through hoops for and do this, and this, and they can come in with a set of check boxes and hand it to the code enforcement officer, I can see why it would be an easy, here's the code enforcement officer's approval, let's move forward from there. If there's no process in place where there is, they're essential services, they should have to jump through a set of hoops to make sure that this is set up correctly and it's not going to pose a danger to the community that they're setting it up in and those types of things. So if there's no process in place for that to be done at code enforcement level, then I would have to agree with Steve that it needs to be done at the planning board level. If there's another process in place that these caveats are checked off, then to me it makes sense that code enforcement can approve it. So while it sounds like, while I partially agree with Steve, I do think that we need to find out from Bailey why this sits in the code enforcement officer's responsibility.
Yep. Yep. Good point. Good point. Valerie.
Okay. Just with what Wes said, evidently there was somebody who was upset with something that it got approved. I don't know anything about the specifics of that, but I'm just looking at the definition of essential services, and along with all the usual utilities, it also says includes towers, poles, mains, drains. I can see how people, traffic signals, a neighbor might not want or would want one of those things near them. You wouldn't necessarily want a tower put up beside your house. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but I can see how somebody would want to know that it's happening, notice to abutters and all that kind of stuff. So I can, and then my understanding was planning board operates at one thing, but conditional use requires a public hearing, in which case then it would all be conditional use, because maybe you can just go to the planning board and not have to go through a public hearing for some things, which I can totally understand. Not everything has to go to a public hearing, but anyway, the point is, I agree that it shouldn't be just the CEO can go and approve these things. I think it should have to be notice for essential services, utility lines, everything else going down the street in front of your house that wasn't there before. That's my
Okay.
thought.
Yeah, thank you, Val. So it seems, Wes, you still have your hand up. Is
No, I
that
don't know how to, I don't know how to shut it off. Sorry.
okay? All right, you just,
I've
all
been
right,
hitting it. Oh, there it is right there. All right, I found it.
okay, cool. All right, so we'll revisit this after we get some feedback from Bailey. We'll move on. Essential services A, roadside distribution line of 34.5 and lower power, all code enforcement. And that hasn't changed from the prior land use table. Yes, Valerie.
I would say that the whole section, like there's like 6 or 7 things that all say essential services, all that just, we got to talk to Bailey and it all should be the same thing. Doesn't matter what the little subcategories are, I wouldn't think. I think it all should be the same. And maybe you could strike all those extra lines and just call it essential services. But if you want to subdivide it, fine. But I think it all has to be clarified with either Bailey and or what's going on. And we don't need to talk about that. We can move on.
Thank you, Val. Go ahead, Joe.
Madam Chair, I've spoken with Bailey about this one. This is the type of thing where you, when you build a house and CMP connects your meter, that you do what's called an 1190 form. That's something that typically code enforcement officers do directly from their desk in all areas. So this is lower than 34.5. This is the stuff that's going to come into your house. Typically is going to be a power line feeding a home. I think it would be recommendable to leave this with CEO. That way, sometimes builders get hung up on those. They need it to proceed to get power to the site. So I think the CEO is the appropriate authority here. So does Bailey.
Okay. Val.
I believe for that kind of power line from a house, you obviously have to go get approval from the power company and they have to do it according to state rules. Why does it need to be permitted through the town at all? Why can't it just say yes?
Madam Chair, this the 1190 form, I don't have it in front of me, but basically it lets the utility company know, the power company know that the property is in compliance with subdivision laws, shoreline zoning laws, which the CEO would know. The CEO would know, okay, this is an approved site, they can build here. The power company needs to know that before they come in and put a pole in. They need to know that there's no code enforcement issues. That's what the 1190 form is.
Thank you, Joe. Ethna, did you have something to add?
Joe just covered
Okay.
it. Thank you, Joe.
Okay. All right. Okay. So any other comments with that section, with that line 30, the power service to residential? Okay, moving down, essential services, non-road or cross-country distribution lines involving 10 poles or less. This also saw some changes. Joe, anything we should know in particular about this one? Or is this something we should have Bailey comment on?
This one is obviously looks like the major change is the planning board 3. I don't have that now, but it's only in resource protection shoreland. Okay. Tracy, do you remember Bailey's note on that one?
I don't remember the note, but I do vaguely remember the planning board meeting where it was discussed where they wanted. It had something to do with the pole distance. If you give me a minute, I can look back through my handwritten notes and see if I can find where that is.
There's actually an error with this. I have the current town code here. It wasn't previously CEO. It was conditional use with a 3 footnote. So they want to make it less restrictive from conditional use to planning board. So that's on page 3820, our current land use table, which has the distribution lines involving 10 poles or less as conditional use required in resource protection and shoreland, not CEO as it's shown here.
Cindy,
Yes, go ahead, Ethan.
isn't the column that was formerly conditional use in the 11 poles or more part of the table?
That is as well. So 11 poles or more are also were conditional use, and they're being downgraded to planning board.
Right, no, my table says that 10 poles or less was CEO and now it's planning board.
Yeah, that's the, if you go to the current use table, it indicates that it's conditional use. So the CEO is a typo, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
All right, so why don't we have a discussion with Bailey about this? Does the board want to revisit this with Bailey, the essential services lines and the typos can be? Wes, you've got your hand up?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I think basically as a planning board, we have authority over resource protection and shoreline anyways. So that's why we were recommending it to be changed to planning board.
Okay, thank you, Wes. Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, but didn't Ethna say earlier that by changing it to planning board only, it eliminates the opportunity for public hearing or the requirement for public hearing? As opposed to conditional use would require a public hearing, is that correct?
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, it has to be on, the planning board agenda, so the public knows that it's being discussed, but it doesn't require a public hearing. Right,
Madam Chairman, can I ask a question of Wes?
Yes.
Wes, when the planning board would, if the planning board were to review this, what are the criteria that you would look at in a non-roadside cross-country distribution? Would you be looking at setbacks from the edge of the water, whether it's wetland? Those are the type of things that you would be reviewing?
Right, yes, basically, yes, that's exactly what we would be reviewing.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So so getting up to essential services involving 10 poles or less, are you good? Is the board good with the changes? Do you want to have a discussion with Bailey, or are you good with the change to planning board under resource protection and shoreland, and we're ready to move on? Okay, all right. Essential services involving 11 poles or more. We've got all the changes there, all the red there are correct. So they want to change conditional use to planning board on those 4 categories. Any objection or concerns from the board? Okay. All right. Every other, so then it's other essential services. There's a yes across the board. And no changes. That's the way it's been, with the prior land use table. Valerie.
I think you skipped the essential services non-roadside with towers, cell phone.
Yes, I did. Sorry.
That's all right. So it's just that I was thinking that in that one, there's a lot of planning board in the downtown commercial and village, but I would say residential for the same reason. You'd want to have a planning board so somebody would know and maybe a butters would get notified.
Okay, yeah, so let's bump back up there because that's a brand new one. This is all new, and obviously, you know, the not allowed use under resource protection, shoreland, and Route 17 overlay. So Val is suggesting that residential be changed from CEO to planning board. Any thoughts on that? Steve?
I agree. And given the fact that this is a brand new category and casting no dispersions on our brand new code enforcement officer, until the next review, I'd like to see planning board across the board. Thank you.
All right. Steve is suggesting planning board across the board. Any other thoughts? Probably something we ought to have a chat with Bailey about, just to see the rationale for the delineation here. Maybe there's something, again, Ethna raised the point earlier. Were there other checks and balances that had to come into play before, you know, it could even possibly reach the code enforcement officer? So let's star this one for Bailey, for Bailey's feedback. We're missing her tonight. Okay, now moving on to other essential services. This is yes across the board. No changes from the prior land use table. Everyone okay with this? All right. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Mark has brought up in the past buildings, and he brought up his lot up there on Loon Lake Road. The change in this one here is, it used to say facilities of essential services, accessory to permit uses. That's the big change here.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
So that addresses, I think, or maybe it doesn't address, and maybe we should leave that in there so that it's a smoother process, to go along a little bit with Mr. Borgard said. Thanks.
So Steve, you're suggesting that the redlined words remain in that. I agree with you.
Streamlines it and gets us to permit or gets us to public hearing, I do. If this is being addressed somewhere else, which I couldn't find, I think this is another one I'd like to star and have maybe Wes can fill in the blanks here as to why. Wes, are you still with us? I don't see you there.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, maybe he can tell us why they wanted to change that heading. Thank you.
I honestly don't recall why we decided to change that heading, Steve. I think that needs to go back to Bailey.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we'll have a discussion. We'll have a discussion with Bailey on that before we reach a decision. Event center is next. That's brand new. An event center, it's also a brand new definition in our town code glossary. So an event center is a structure used for groups of 25 or more people to gather for an event, retreat, reunion, or a regularly scheduled program. An event center may include a residential dwelling, arena, lecture hall, banquet facility, or outdoor area, or any other space used for such gatherings. So restricted, not allowed in resource protection in shoreland and woodland and residential, conditional use for village, downtown commercial, and commercial, and not allowed in industrial and Route 17 overlay. Comments or concerns from the board? All right, Valerie, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, just wondering how is an event center different from like a wedding thing? And lots of those kind of wedding things, which may be restaurants too, but what's the real difference? And they're in Shoreline, as far as I know, there's several. So how is that not allowed in shoreline protection, shoreline, whatever? It just seems like they already exist in those places. You know,
Mhm.
the Loon Lodge is an event center, functions as an event center. It's also a restaurant, but it functions as an event center. And several other things are like that. And I think that's shoreline. That seems shoreline to me. So just saying.
Yeah, I think what they've done is they've clearly identified a structure just used for events, has these limitations, as opposed to, Loon Lodge, which provides lodging, restaurant, and events.
Why?
But you do raise a good point. Yeah, that's Wes. Hold on, I'm going to go to Mark next, and then maybe Wes can comment on why the planning board added this in. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, at the last meeting I brought up, I asked the question of whether if you had a residential development and a clubhouse that went with it, that the folks were allowed to use, the members of that homeowners association or whatnot. Would that fall under event center and not be allowed in a residential area? It seems like it would be fit, and lots of residential communities, planned residential communities have those types of things.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So Wes, hearing these two comments, and do you recall why the planning board brought in or created a new land use for event center?
No, I don't recall why, but Mark does bring up a good point that a clubhouse would fall under an event center. I think this needs to be looked at further.
Okay.
But it is, it's not, it would be just strictly an event center. It wouldn't be your Loon Lodge or your Bald Mountain camps where they're holding a wedding now and then. An event center would just be strictly, that's all they're doing is events. You know what I mean?
Right, okay. So Mark raises a valid point with, perhaps say in a residential zone under conditional use, an event center would be appropriate for the neighborhood it serves. Mark, you had something else to add?
Yes, I think the way Wes explained it, that's good, but I'm not sure that the definition and the land uses match up that well. And so, rather than no in residential and woodland, I would think, I don't know why it couldn't be conditional use everywhere, and let them see where it fits, because I think there's lots of different ways that this could come up and not be allowed with the way the definition's written.
Thank you, Mark. Shelley, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I agree, because I think there's already some event centers that people use as houses. I think there's actually an event center that's on the Bonnie Point Road that I'm not sure if nobody knows. It's a gorgeous place to get married, and it's on the water. So I agree with Mark. I think it should be a conditional use all the way across.
What do other board members think? Go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, I think Mark brings up an interesting point. If you do make a conditional use across the board, then our other business laws, laws pertaining to businesses can help the planning board figure out whether it's a viable thing or not for each. each permit that someone's seeking.
Mhm. Okay, Steve,
Yes, across the board, except for resource protection. Whether there's one there now or not, I think we need to protect our lands that are in the category. I would recommend that a conditional use permit from shoreland to the right, including Route 17 overlay. Thank you.
Ethna, do you feel any differently, or are you agreeing with, what so far what Ethan and Steve have had to say?
I believe that an event center is extremely different from your loon lodges, your Bald Mountain camps. Those aren't event centers. Those are established businesses that allow for weddings to be held at their location, but that does not make them an event center.
Madam Chair,
Yeah, go ahead, Ethan.
I suppose the first thing that needs to happen before any of us can agree with conditional use across the board or anything else is a clearly defined definition of what an event center actually is.
Yeah, review. We do have a definition, of event center.
Or
And
maybe it needs to be refined. I mean,
maybe it needs, yeah, perhaps. So something else, we can have a discussion with Bailey about, since it's new and just trying to understand the rationale. But I would, yeah, I agree with Steve, with conditional use to be added to shoreland, woodland and residential. Go ahead, Mark.
25 seems like a pretty low threshold for number of people, if I remember the definition properly.
It is. It's 20. Yeah, it is. It's 25 or more. Shelley, any thoughts?
I'm
Right,
just
so
now
at this-
trying to Google how many businesses that we might have that's out there for venues. Where is the Maple Hill Farm Inn and Conference Center?
No idea. All right, so at this point, it seems that we've got a consensus that wish to include conditional use in residential, woodland, and maybe shoreland. And this is so something to, just ask Bailey about this new category and why it's necessary. Yes, go ahead, Joe.
Madam Chair, I'm looking at some notes. I think they're Tom Lillis's notes that have Kristen Collins' notes in the sidebar from 2019. An event center is in this table, highlighted in yellow. There's no actual note next to this, but there's also no designation in each of the columns. So I think what you're working through now makes sense to me to talk about, which designation would you allow or recommend or require, I guess, in each of these areas, districts. I think the event center came up at some point in the past, and then the planning board talked about it, made their pass at it, and I think what you're doing now is appropriate. It's a new item, I guess is what I'm seeing back in 19, but there's no note as to why it was put in there. I just want to share that with you.
Okay. All right, so we will revisit event center. So Bailey can field some questions. Moving on to filling or other earth moving activity less than 10 cubic yards. The only change is on shoreland, it goes from yes to code enforcement approval. Any objections to that? All right, moving on to filling or other earth moving activity more than 10 cubic yards. So in the resource protection, it goes from conditional use to planning board. Any board member disagree or public have concerns with that? All right. Garages, storage buildings, and similar structures not intended for human habitation on lots without principal residences, I'm guessing is the missing word. No changes there, except the Route 17 overlay, which is a new category. That includes code enforcement officer approval. All right, that completes 3825. Screaming right along to 3826, home occupations. We've got a number of changes here where we go from yes across the board to planning board under resource protection shoreland, code enforcement, for woodland residential village, downtown commercial, no under industrial, and for Route 17 overlay, code enforcement officer, building permit. So thoughts on this? Just seeing if the home occupation definition did change. It now reads a commercial activity which is conducted in whole or in part within a dwelling unit or accessory structure and is clearly incidental to and compatible with the residential use of the property and surrounding residential uses. Yes, Joe.
Madam Chair, I do have a note from Bailey on this one. The intent is to have a review process that would verify the applicant is following standards for home occupation and not reaching the point of requiring a conditional use permit. So just want to verify that they're following the standards for home occupation.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay, if there are no public questions or comments, then we'll consider this okay as is. Individual private campsites, there are no changes from the last land use table except Route 17 overlay. They are not allowed. Yes, Mark.
I brought this up at the last meeting when we were looking at the other areas, and under residential where it says no, according to the definition, somebody couldn't have a tent platform or in that, and it just seems too restrictive. It seems like there's numerous times when it would be appropriate in residential. So I think some type of review would make more sense than just saying no.
The tent platform is a, let me just make sure I'm residential. Yeah, no. Any other questions or comments?
I think the intent was for RVs. And maybe we need to maybe that needs to be reviewed, adjusted, but the intent's for RVs, so nobody can just park an RV on a vacant lot and leave it there for years and years.
Okay. So the Steve,
There are some clearly defined businesses within the shoreland zone. And I think it's too restrictive to say no across the board, because to take Wes's example, if I was to put 5 sites here on my property with proper sewage, with proper water, and land management techniques being employed, I think that would be a wonderful adjunct to an established business that already exists within shoreland. And there are a number of properties around the area that can fall into that category. So I would like to see where in this campsite business, a better definition, a planning board review in shoreland, a planning board review in woodland, residential. I don't think village is a place for it, but I'm willing to allow a discussion on that one. I mean, not allow, but entertain discussion. Downtown commercial, and then leave the rest out. Thanks.
Can I butt in there for a minute?
go ahead, Wes.
So there used to be, and I'm not seeing it, a use for campgrounds. And did that get taken out and just put under individual private campsites? Because what Steve would be suggesting would be more like a campground rather than an individual private campsite.
That's a good point.
Madam Chair,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry,
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I believe campgrounds is still in the table towards the top of the list. It's the 5th one down, I think, on 3825.
Right, it is.
So that would be like what Steve is what Steve is suggesting. A private campsite would be just like a campsite, like I said, a campsite on a vacant lot, where somebody would park an RV of some sort and just live in it, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mark, go ahead.
At one of our previous meetings, we spent quite a lot of time talking about RVs and things. Unfortunately for Wes, he wasn't present, but it was pretty much unresolved on how to manage RVs with the 3 different contradicting timeframes that they could be allowed on a property, from 14 days up to 12 months. And it seemed like you folks, the board, were gonna revisit that and go right through it again to see if you couldn't put it in a format that did accomplish what the intent was, and to make it less confusing and to close up the loopholes that were in it. And so I'm sure you've all got it in your notes, but I just bringing it up because we're on this campsite thing now, and Wes brought up the RV thing, but I didn't see it in Bailey's synopsis as unfinished business, and maybe it's in the one Joe's gonna run by you there towards the end of the meeting, but I just figured this was an opportune time to mention that situation exists there. Nothing was really resolved, and it's left confusing and a lot of loopholes.
Yeah, that's true. And Wes did bring up the fact that this the intent was to address, RVs on a vacant lot, but I don't think you assume it's a vacant lot. It just says it's an area of land which is not associated with a campground, which is developed for repeated camping by its owner. So, I mean, it could be a 5-acre house lot with a cleared, or even a 3-acre house lot, whatever, that's got, an area cleared with a pad or platform. I don't interpret this as a vacant lot, if that was the intent. So, and Mark's right, we did have that noted to go back and review, because there was some conflicting language once we got through chapter 38. And Wes also, and yeah, the definition or the title of it is individual campsite, singular, but in the land use table, it's plural. So the definition is in the Rangeley Town Code definition on page 3916. It's singular, plural in the table. So I don't know if that matters or not. So any other questions or concerns about this one? All right, moving on to heavy industrial. No across the board except conditional use in industrial. Concerns, everyone okay with that? Light industrial. Woodland was converted from conditional use to no, and that is the only change. Any concerns there? Okay, yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Is where light industrial definition is a completely enclosed facility that no one really knows what's going on inside the building. It seems like there could be applications in the woodland zone where it would make sense to allow it. I mean, the woodland zone is, a third of the town anyway. So
okay.
So I don't know, it seems like for a diversified economy somewhere that there should be a review process for that also, that and the conditional use, I think, would probably be the correct one. So I'm not sure. I think there could be things that meet the light industrial definition that would fit into the woodland zone quite well.
Yes, Ethan.
I'm inclined to agree with Mark on that statement. I don't have a zone map in front of me, but Steve Philbrick probably could answer this. Wasn't Whamco in the furniture shop on Mingo Loop? That's in a woodland zone, correct? And that functioned for many years. And I think Mark's right. In a diversified economy where shipping businesses are very big, involving the internet, it may come that there's an opportunity for someone to create jobs and make a living in a reasonable fashion in the woodland zone.
Mm-hmm. They also tightened up the definition of light industrial and made it, a little more clear, where the operations do not involve any furnaces or machinery that emit noxious fumes or gases, discharge dirt, dust, or particle matter in the air, or result in noise or vibration. So they've tightened this up, which probably would make it conducive to woodland under a conditional use permit. I tend to agree with Ethan.
Can I chime in for a moment?
Absolutely, Wes, go ahead.
So this all came about, this whole industrial thing obviously came about because of the cement plant. we as a planning board basically want industrial cut and dry. I think zoning needs to change in this town and needs to be expanded. But we really need this cut and dry where things can go and where things can't go, because that turned into a nightmare. And that's why we want light industrial basically just to stay in the industrial zone.
Yeah, that's heavy industrial. That's strictly in the industrial zone. Light industrial, conditional use is allowed for downtown commercial, industrial.
Am I
Used to
looking at
be,
the wrong thing?
that's okay, Wes.
Oh, conditional use.
Yeah, it was conditional use in Woodland. And I think that's where, I mean, given how vast the Woodland zone is, and the acreage it encompasses. And the fact that West, you guys really did tighten up the light industrial definition to protect, you know, to make it less impactful on, you know, with the abutters, that Woodland would probably be appropriate under conditional use, as it was before. Does anyone disagree with Ethan and I and Mark? Okay, Steve shaking his head, he agrees. Ethna, do you feel strongly either way about this, to keep it at conditional use for Woodland?
I agree with the statements made by you and Steve.
Okay. Shelley, do you have any, do you disagree?
No, I agree with the conditional use.
Okay,
the
so we're
Woodland.
gonna, all right, so the, as a consensus, the Board of Selectmen are gonna change light industrial and keep it at conditional use. All right, moving on to N. No changes there. Route 17 overlay, no room at the inn. They're not allowed. Any disagreements from the board or the public that present? Okay. Institutional. I have a notation here that it's not new, even though it's in green. And unfortunately, the old land use table is not alphabetical, so I need to search. So institutional is in the old land use table, in our current, I'm sorry, land use table on page 3819. And it is currently no for resource protection, no for shoreland, conditional use for woodland, conditional use for residential, conditional use for village, downtown, commercial, and no for industrial. So that one should be colored black. The institutional definition in our in chapter 38 is a nonprofit or quasi-public use or institution such as a church, library, public or private school, hospital, or municipally owned or operated building, structure, land used for public purposes. So yes, Valerie.
I'm just double checking because I thought you had said under institutional that it was not allowed in shoreland and it was allowed in woodland on the old table, and that's the opposite of what's on this green thing. So I just want to make sure that the old and the new is the same, and then I'm fine with it.
Yeah, so shoreland, under this chart says conditional use. It's currently has a no designation for institutional structures. Mark?
Again, under the woodland thing, to say no for institutional, that the town couldn't have a building in the woodland zone, a municipal building, something like that. It just seems like that's too restrictive. I think, according to the definition for institutional, there could be several uses that should be several applications of an institutional use in the woodland zone. I don't think it would be damaging to that with some type of review.
And in our current land use, it does say conditional use for woodland zone. Does the board feel it should be changed to restrictive and not allowed? Steve?
There's some nice examples of the woodland zone being used with buildings for nonprofits in our region. And I agree that that's too restrictive. It should say, in my opinion, to clarify from institutional, no in resource protection, conditional use all the way across till we get to industrial and Route 17 overlay. So in my opinion, it goes conditional use for woodland, excuse me, shoreland, woodland, residential, village, etc. Thank you.
So the only change with our current usage, our current institutional land use table says no for shoreland. Steve agrees with the change to conditional use across the board. Do any board members feel differently? I could concur with that. Ethna, you look like you're thinking about it.
Just agreeing with it.
Okay, all right. So, so the board, there seems to be a consensus that institutional could be, it will be conditional use for shoreland, woodland, residential, village, downtown, commercial, and no for resource protection and industrial. All right. All right. Lodging house is new. Thoughts from the board or the public? Lodging house, just to read is a one-family dwelling where one or more occupants are primarily permanent in nature and rent is paid for guest rooms. Also can be referred as a hostel. Ethan.
I'm inclined to treat the lodging house the same as we did the previous live institutional, in the exact same manner as far as conditional use.
Okay. So Ethan is suggesting to change woodland from no to conditional use.
Agreed.
Okay, Steve agrees. Ethna agrees. I agree. Okay. And Shelley agrees as well. All right. Manufactured housing. Resource protection going from no to planning board. And remaining the same across the board. Any objections to that? Go ahead, Steve.
I don't know that I have an objection. I'd like to know why, what thought process behind this. Wes, can you fill us in on that?
I can try. From changing it from no in the resource protection to planning board.
Yes.
So basically that's going to be very minimal because really you can't build anything in the resource protection because those lots wouldn't be buildable. Well, any new lot within the past 20 years or so. Basically, we're treating this just like any other house that we would build in that zone. If you can build a stick, if the lot would approve you to build a stick framed house in the resource protection, why not a modular home?
The manufactured housing would include a trailer.
I believe there's a difference.
There is.
Manufactured home is actually like a modular home. A trailer would still have its axles underneath it.
You did update the definition under manufactured housing. So it is structures transportable in one or more sections that are not constructed on a permanent chassis and are designed to be used as dwellings on foundations when connected to required utilities, including the plumbing, heating, air conditioning, or electrical systems contained in the unit.
Can you read that one more time?
I sure can.
Lisa.
So it is structures transportable in one or more sections that are not constructed on a permanent chassis and are designed to be used as dwellings on foundations when connected to required utilities, including the plumbing, heating, air conditioning, or electrical systems contained in the unit.
So not constructed on a permanent chassis makes it different from a trailer.
Okay.
You know, they would be towed on site on a trailer and then removed from them and set on a foundation per our building codes.
All right. I've got Ethan with his hand up.
I just, in regards to how this is written, and I'm jumping into the mobile home definition as well to see the differences, and the big difference is the chassis part. However, I currently live in a manufactured home and have owned a mobile home as well. And my mobile home sat on a 8-foot foundation, and not on a permanent chassis. It may have been designed that way. So where does the difference lie? If your mobile home is set on a permanent foundation.
I think that's a bit of a gray area, Ethan, because it's my understanding if you cut the trailer out from underneath a mobile home, you've turned it into a manufactured home.
And yeah, that's interesting because, and I don't want to like take up a lot of time on this, but if you were to go into my old basement in my double wide home that I had, you could see where the axles used to be bolted to the brackets. All that was left was the brackets, and the joists were just made of steel. So
right.
It just looked like a house. So I just wondering because I'm wondering if someone attempted to do this, even when not in the zone we're talking about, if there was going to be some kind of argument over what's considered manufactured and what's considered mobile.
I think it has a lot to do with the fact of a steel beam for a single wide or a double wide. The steel beam, because I've had customers that actually use the steel beam and rebuild their entire house, but unfortunately, because they use that same steel beam, it's still considered a mobile home.
Okay. Valerie, go ahead.
I like the new definition of the mobile home. I mean, the modular home. I think the modular home is a better word for it because manufactured, if you look it up, pretty much always references mobile homes. And if we're going to reference the state definitions, we got to make sure that that definition is what we're talking about, because I think manufactured home usually means a mobile home, and modular is the word you want.
Yeah, I think Val's right. Historically, that has been the typical verbiage. So looks like we've got some gray areas, and
So I think that the heading just needs to change from manufacturer to modular because, you know,
Mhm.
4 or 5 lines down, we actually have a section for mobile homes.
Right. All right, so modular. And modular. All right, we'll make sure that that doesn't change anything too drastically, just, you know, updating manufactured to modular. I think everyone agrees with that. So is everyone all set with resource protection going from no to planning board? Okay, not seeing any objections. Next is marina, which is new. And of course, it's unconditional use for shoreland, downtown commercial, and commercial. Any objections to that? All right. Mineral exploration. Some changes here, going from conditional use to no and resource protection, and conditional use to CEO in the shoreland zone. Valerie.
I'm just wondering why you would allow mineral exploration in a place where you won't allow mining, which is the next line.
Mhm. So mineral exploration is hand sampling, test boring, or other methods of determining the nature or extent of mineral resources, which create minimal disturbance to the land and which include reasonable measures to restore the land to its original condition, which would be very different than mining. But again, if the intent is to be able to mine after the mineral exploration, then why? Yeah. All right, Steve, you first, then Mark.
Thank you. A number of years ago, I witnessed in front of my camp on the Cupsuptic River, brown water, went upstream a number of miles and found mineral exploration going on with incredible amount of disruption to the Cupsuptic River for many, many miles. Granted, it's not in Rangeley, but I can foresee some of our streams and whatnot. If somebody screams gold, you're going to see all sorts of things happening in our shoreland zoning. So my very strong feeling after witnessing and having to have the state step in to stop this this dredging process that was taking place, that we put no on resource protection, which is currently there in terms of what they want, and shoreland, and then leave the rest. Same with mining. Thanks.
All right. Go ahead, Ethan.
I got a question for Wes, and the definition's pretty clear. I just want to make sure that in regards to test boring and mineral exploration, if this definition is dedicated entirely to discovering the mineral itself, or if it could also be related to test boring as far as geological surveys, if a water source was needed. As you know, it's common and it's essential to do that for well exploration for public water systems and such. And I just didn't know if this would cross into that, if that's what it was intended to do. And that would be the reason why mining's not allowed, even if you find something.
I couldn't tell you the intent on it. I don't recall, Ethan, but I think you do bring up a decent point on that. But, you know, looking for water sources would probably fall under your essential services anyways.
That's true.
Yep. Mark, did you have your hand up? Did I miss that? Okay. All right. So So Steve is suggesting the shoreland zone be changed to no. I had that in my notes as well when I went through that it should be no. Anyone else disagree? All right, so we're going to change mineral exploration from to no. All right, mining of land. Where are we with the time? All right, 20 minutes. Mining of land. No changes here. Any objections? Okay. Mobile home. Also no changes here. Any concerns? None. Mobile home park. No changes here. Yes, Mark.
At a previous meeting, you folks were discussing the mobile home parks, and someone asked if the state required the town to allow for a mobile home park, and they didn't. I can't remember if there was an answer given or not, or if someone was going to look into it. And one thing I was wondering, where they're changing the lot size in the woodland zone, proposing to change the lot size from 40,000 square feet to 80,000 square feet, which is basically from 1 acre to 2 acres. If every mobile home needed 2 acres, would that make sense?
The definition of mobile home park is a parcel of land under common ownership intended or used for the placement of 3 or more mobile homes. Doesn't say the minimum size. I did have a little bit of feedback from someone who has attended, zoomed in on these meetings before, that why do we need to allow for mobile home parks if the LURC allows them in plantations, so I just wanted to put that out there as well, that was feedback I received, and let them know we'd be discussing it when we reached the land use table. And unfortunately they're not here tonight. Mark, go ahead.
It seems like the town would have to figure out lot sizes and stuff that would accommodate these if that definition doesn't have anything in there. I don't know if it's anywhere else in this zoning ordinance, but would each unit need what's required for a single family dwelling, or is it something that can go under a cluster type arrangement, or how would it work?
Ethna.
Just really quick to kind of pull directly from the state statute. Municipalities shall permit manufactured housing, and manufactured housing is mobile homes. So they shall permit manufactured housing to be placed or erected on individual house lots in a number of locations on undeveloped lots where single family dwellings are allowed, subject to the same requirements as single family dwellings. So that's with regards to allowing them. With regards to mobile homes, to the mobile home parks, it then there is a set of regulations of mobile home parks in state statute. And that covers the size of any mobile home park lot served by public sewer systems to be larger than the smaller of 6,500 square feet, or the area of the smallest residential lot permitted in the municipality. And it goes on and on and on. So it's in state statute.
Okay. I'm just taking a look just to see, 3856. I don't see it. All right, so thank you, Ethna, for taking the time to look that up. So state statute is default unless we make it more restrictive. Any other questions or concerns? All set with keeping this land use as mobile home park, conditional use in the woodland zone only. Go ahead, Steve.
I think it's important to listen to what's being said and the concerns that some people have brought up. My 2 cents worth goes like this. If we're going to allow mobile home parks in Rangeley, there has to be a clear definition of how much land it sets on. I think it should be connectable to our sewer and our municipal water. If the criterion that the planning board comes up with for the cluster, to use Mark's vernacular, then bring it back to us. But I'd like to see it taken out of this until we have a good, clear idea as to what the heck we're going to do with mobile home parks and where they're going to go and what the visual impact is, et cetera. Thank you.
Okay. Mark.
Yes, on this woodland zone, Steve, I think it was Steve that brought it up at the previous meeting with not necessarily mobile home parks, but some uses that were adjacent to the scenic byway, that were in the woodland zone, that there could be some issues with some of that. And I mentioned at the last meeting about the woodland zone. Maybe we need a woodland 1, woodland 2, woodland 3. I would just like to reiterate that in thinking that the woodland zone, as many thousands of acres as it is, may at least need a woodland and a woodland 1, some type of designation there, because I think it's too big for just a one size fits all. And I know that's not a timely thing for this process here, but it's just something I'd like to throw out there that I think going ahead, the town needs to look at, because I'm pretty sure one size doesn't fit all, and it's not going to be the best use to the land for the community. Thank you.
For what it's worth, I agree 100% with that.
Yeah, that does make sense. And you're right. The more remote areas of the woodland zone, may allow other uses that are not as close to the residential zone. Shelley?
So, and then I just want to make sure I'm saying this correct, because my neighbor had one. There's 2 that I know that are on the Loon Lake Road, and they're tasteful for mobile homes. We keep talking about attainable housing, affordable housing. I'm sorry, mobile homes are going to be it. If the prices keep going up, those might be the options that our workers will be able to afford. So I don't want to shut the door on them completely. I know, for example, on a double wide, those are saleable on the secondary market.
Shelley, we're talking about mobile home parks, though.
Okay.
Not mobile home, not single,
mobile homes themselves.
just the parks.
Okay. But they go in line with the same thing. I mean, there's one that, I don't know if you've seen it, it's on the Town Farm Road. Those are double wides, and those are for the retired folks who actually pay to put them in, and they're leasing land from them. So there are some mobile home parks that are very tastefully done.
And I think that was Steve's point, is that, you know, at this point, there isn't any verbiage that identifies how they, you know, what they're expected, you know, to look like, or because, you know, we can get more restrictive with what the state allows.
And
And,
an
you
individual
know,
can actually get a Main State Housing mobile home loan that is actually in a park on leased land.
so Shelley, you're saying you want to keep mobile home parks as conditional use in the Woodland District as it currently reads?
Yeah.
Yes, Ethan.
I agree with Shelley, but I also agree with Steve as far as verbiage. A mobile home park is essentially it's a business. Typically, somebody or a company owns the park, and fees are done however they're done for utilities and land and dues and such and such. So I think there needs to be more verbiage, and I think maybe you can put your light restrictions in the verbiage for the conditional use permit, or whatever we're going to allow. But I do think that they're probably going to become essential, and as far as being seen from the road, maybe in that verbiage we can have tree buffers, length of driveway, etc. If that's what the board desires and what the town votes.
Can I chime in for a moment?
Absolutely, Wes, go ahead.
So, you know, this is all up to you guys. What you got to consider, though, is the type of people you're going to attract to this town. It's a step above Section 8. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Wes. So Wes, you know, though the planning board, you know, put forth the woodland zone as conditional use, it sounds like you're saying you don't,
I wouldn't
you don't
want
want,
them there.
you don't,
That's
okay,
my
a mobile
personal
home
thing.
park, not a
No
mobile
across
home
the
used
board.
as a single, yeah, as a single, but a mobile home park.
Yeah, no across the board would be my thought.
Okay. And Ethan made some great points. Ethan, I just want to acknowledge that as far as what the conditional use permit could cover. And Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, the brief section that Ethna read about state statutes, it said that you would need to, the state statutes allows them to be used and the town can be more restrictive to the minimum lot size that's available for any other type of dwelling. So if you were on water and sewer and you got down to, there's some provisions in zoning and some changes proposed to go down to 5,000 square feet and per dwelling unit. And, you know, that means you could put 8 of them on an acre. And if somebody, you know, had umpteen acres and stuff like that, you know, even though the town is looking to try to help with the density situation and things like that, you know, without parameters in place, you may not get your desired result. Thank you.
That's a good point. Ethan, go ahead.
I'll just build on what Mark said, and he's right. You may not. The definition in our glossary says 3 or more mobile homes, but there's nothing saying we can't say 3 or more, but no more than 3, or you know, or whatever it is that we see to be appropriate.
So you're saying we could always work a cap into our, into the definition of the number of mobile homes that can be. But I think what Mark is, yeah.
Yeah, I know what Mark's saying, under the ordinances for lot size and such, you have potential for them to read it at word and say, well, this says this, and we can put 8 of them because you say this. But if we have separate verbiage pointed directly at mobile home parks, it may not be what everybody's envisioning as far as a park goes, at least in size and multitude.
Thank you, Ethan. So Ethan, are you suggesting that you're still for the mobile home park in Woodland under conditional use, but with a cap added to the total?
Yeah, I'm suggesting that I'm for it being conditional use in Woodland Zone, but with a fairly large level of scrutiny as far as how we decide what laws exactly pertain to mobile home parks themselves.
Go ahead, Steve.
I first of all, I want to thank everybody for that input. It's all very important, but I want to go back and stress one more time that there's such a great amount of work to go into determining what a mobile home park is, in terms of density, in terms of water, sewer, et cetera. I'd like to strike that for this go around and bring that up at a later date.
Okay, so it looks like Ethan agrees. I agree as well. Ethna, do you have a preference either way? I mean,
I don't think we're clear enough on the regulations. I mean, you can read the state statutes, but there and again, I almost think that this would have to fall under a subdivision permit too, because you're putting 3 or more units on this individually owned lot, and that tends to pull in subdivision requirements.
Yeah.
So it gets a little muddy. I think mobile home parks are a little muddy than we're prepared to push forward to anybody right now.
Okay. All right. Looks like we've got a consensus of the board that would, yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, we're 1 minute till 8. So I think the consensus from the board at this point, we've got a majority saying to mobile home parks that it's no across the board. And we can revisit this down the road. It would, Valerie, you had something?
It was just that I agree with no across the board. I was afraid you were going to strike it, in which case state would apply. And I didn't think that was right. I think you wanted to say no across the board. That was it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. All right.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I do want to strike it, and my reasoning for striking it is because if we go no across the board, we may be in fact going against what the state requirements are. If we strike it with the intent of looking at it in the future, I think we meet the intent of what state law says. I'm not the expert in this, but I did read up after our last meeting, and I saw vocabulary that says we have to look at this and then make a determination. Thank you.
I guess we'll get clarification on that. I was under, I'm in the understanding, and I may be wrong, that if we have got a town code that's been approved by the municipal voters and we have specifically identified, you know, a legal and, you know, state recognized development such as a mobile home park and we have no across the board, then it's no across the board. It is more restrictive than the state. But we can get greater clarification. I think, you know, yeah, Steve raises a good point. So let's just make sure that having it included in the land use table makes sure that it doesn't default to state law. One final comment, it's 8 o'clock. Ethan, go ahead.
Sorry, it pertains directly to this. I'm wondering if this is Steve's concern, if I'm hearing him right. If we bring this to the town voters and we change this to no, and the town voters vote down chapter 38 as we rework it, we have reworked it, does that make it revert back to conditional use? And is that what Steve's worried about?
Yeah, it would be anyway. I mean, even if we struck it, it's still until new chapter 38 is approved and the land use table, what currently exists stays. So if chapter 38 is struck, we still have the same land use table that was approved years ago. All right, we're gonna need another meeting. Joe, do you want to, is it advisable to schedule this now for sometime next week? Or do you want us to, or, I mean, our next board meeting is February 22nd.
Madam Chair, the 22nd, you have a full dance card already. I would not recommend doing anything else on that night.
Right.
If you, yeah, in terms of timing, if you want to proceed with this, I would recommend sometime next week. Today is, what's today, Thursday? So 3 days notice, so you could do it as early as Monday.
Monday and Tuesday are out for me. So it would be Wednesday or Thursday, the 16th or 17th, unless that doesn't work for any of the board and I don't have to be here.
Tracy's,
Can I interject? Yeah, thank you. Bailey said she's available on Mondays and Wednesdays only. So
Okay.
keeping that in mind.
All right, so thank you very much, Tracy. So that would be the 16th. I think it's really obviously be great if we could have her here. Does the 16th work for the board?
They
Ethna.
rescheduled my ordinance committee to the 16th. From last night got rescheduled to the 16th. It is at 5.
Okay.
So if we hold it to an hour.
All right. So there's feedback there. Steve, are you available on the 16th? All right, Steve's available. Ethan, are you available? And Ethan, Shelley, how about you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, all right. So it's the 16th. It is, and it will be from 6 to 8. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
thank you.